Well, hello and welcome back to the channel. If you don't know me, my name is Simon Good and I'm a professional mediator and trainer in conflict resolution skills. I have a degree in psychology as well as an MBA, and I started this YouTube channel as a way to provide free resources to help people dealing with conflict situations, pretty frequently in workplaces, I suppose, but I also talk about the different kinds of frameworks and approaches that would work for situations outside of work. And actually, there's a lot of overlap and I think parallels in terms of the different types of things that can be effective at work versus outside. Today, I'm going to be looking at the topic of ultimatums, which is actually one of my favorite topics to cover when I'm doing conflict resolution trainings, just because it's so incredibly useful. I've noticed that it's an area where a lot of people tend to feel a bit uncertain around the best way to do it. And a lot of us, I think, just tend to give an ultimatum in a very direct way, which means that it might come across as a threat. If you don't do this, then this is what's going to happen to you. Or if you do that again, this is what's going to happen. Or if you don't do this, this is how I'm going to punish you, kind of thing. It's a threat. And so, of course, it comes across as a threat. And what happens when we feel threatened? Well, we tend to become defensive. So what we're doing there is inherently inviting the other person to come back at us with something. And I suppose the risk is that we would escalate the conflict. So in the video today, I'm going to be talking about a way that you can still be assertive, still hold your line, still hold on to boundaries, still clarify expectations, etc. So I'm not talking about compromise, but how we can communicate that in a way that the other person's more likely to be receptive to. So what I'm going to do in the video today is to talk about how to give an ultimatum, and then I'll be going through 3 of these different practical workplace case studies. I find these are just so incredibly helpful. It's at demonstrating, well, how do we put this into practice? So I'm going to look at one that's involving an office. There we might use, a medium kind of tone, a little bit formal, but maybe it's not as casual as if we were just dealing with our friend. In the second example, we're looking at a restaurant shift and, a particular person that's doing something when they're scheduling the shifts, I'll explain, and the boss wants them to stop. And then the final one is more of a serious issue. It's involving client confidentiality and a breach there. And so there we probably want to use more of a formal tone. And what I'll be doing is explaining, well, how can we respond to these different levels of formality and use the same kind of approach across different contexts, if that makes sense. I'd love to know if this is something that resonates with you and something that you find useful, by the way. If it is useful, please consider pressing like, but put a comment below, especially if there's something I can do a bit differently, like something I can tweak or whatever. I'd be really grateful for that kind of feedback at the moment. And I suspect that as someone watching this, and obviously it's a topic that's relevant to you, you've probably got a lot of insight to share. So thank you in advance if that's something that you're prepared to do. So I'm just going to zoom in here to get a little bit of a blank page so that I can write with my pen. The way that most people tend to give an ultimatum, I think is, as I mentioned, is just a threat. And it's probably something like this. If you choose to do this, like this is your choice, this is what I'm going to do for you, to you, reward you with, punish you with, take something away, give you something. If you can submit the paperwork by close of business today, then I can approve you under the existing rates, that kind of thing. If you swear at me again, I'm going to hang up the phone. That's probably the most common, simple example of the way that people give an ultimatum as a threat. If you hang up the phone, if you swear at me again, I'm going to hang up. And then, of course, they swear almost immediately, and you probably do hang up on them and feel very justified and look to your colleagues and be like, what was their problem, kind of thing. I can remember a couple of years ago, I was doing some conflict resolution with training when there was someone who worked in a call center. And they said, Simon, I spend all day talking to brick walls. And then during the training, they were just so, I think, unnecessarily adversarial. Like they just created a mountain out of a molehill and they had to speak around every particular topic, and she was interrupting other people and, giving these irrelevant kind of examples. And of course, I'm sitting there going, I wonder how many of those brick walls are brick walls before they talk to you, and how many of them become brick walls because of the way that you're speaking to them. And she was the one that said, if you hang up, I just tell them if they swear at me again, I'm going to hang up on them. And then what do you do? And then I hang up. I'm like, okay, well, like that's a pattern. Do you know what I mean? Is that what you're aiming for? Maybe if you could communicate that threat in a slightly different way, you might start to get to a different outcome. What's that old saying? If we want to, if you always do what you've always done, then you'll always get what you've already got. And I think for some of us, if you're watching this kind of a video, that's not what you're aiming for. So we probably don't want to just do the ultimatum in that simple way where it's just, if you do this, this is what the consequence would be. The more effective way to give an ultimatum actually is that we do it as a choice. So it would be, this is kind of option one. This is the thing that you want to do, and this is the thing that I don't want you to do. If you miss the deadline, if you swear at me again, if you're late for another day without an explanation, whatever the thing is that you're wanting them to stop. If you do that, this is the negative consequence. If you're late again without approval, I'm going to need to consider performance management processes. If you swear at me again, I'm going to end the call. Like ideally, that consequence would be something that we could put in a neutral way. I'm going to end the call, as opposed to if you swear at me again, then you're going to lose your chance of getting any support at all or something like that. Just talk about it in as factual and neutral a way as possible. But here's the thing, it's better to give an ultimatum as a choice. So we put the or here, and then we introduce the second option. This is what I actually want the person to do. And this is the better consequence for them if they do it. My son is 8 years old and we have a lot of fights and arguments in my house about screens, Nintendos and iPads and that kind of thing. And if I say to him something like, look, mate, if you don't put your plate on the sink, then the iPad's going to go off. It's World War III. If I come and take that plate, it's just going to be unnecessary drama from the word go. And he's not listening. And so then when I say, I told you, I gave you a warning, it just didn't resonate, So although I did, I suppose, tell him this is what's going to happen, I don't ethically feel like I did a very good job of letting him decide what he wanted to do. The better way to do even that simple situation is to do it as a choice. So I'd say something like, look, mate, if you don't put your plate on the sink like I've asked, then the iPad's going to have to go off. Neutral phrasing, fact-based consequence. Or if you can pause your show and put your plate on the sink, I'll give you an extra 5 minutes. This is where that introduction of that second option comes in. This is the thing that I want you to do. Put your plate on the sink, and then the better consequence for you, if you're willing to do that, is that you're going to get an extra 5 minutes. Now, this might just be that you don't have to suffer the other consequence. Like I could say to someone, if you're late again, I'll need to consider performance management processes. Personally, I like putting those kind of threats on the table. I'll need to think about doing this because I'm not locking myself into anything if I decide to be a bit more lenient or give them one more chance or something like that. You know what I mean? I'm not saying I'm definitely going to do that. I'll say, look, you're at risk of this happening. And so then the positive consequence might be you don't need to worry about that. If you're late again, I'll need to consider performance management processes, or if you can make sure that you're on time moving forward, and I'll keep track of it over the next month, you don't need to worry about any of those unnecessary hassles and dramas to go through. What do you reckon? Is that a technique that sounds familiar to you? Is it an approach that you already use? Or would this be incorporating, probably for a lot of people, it's that second element into the way that you deal with these kind of situations? I would very much like to hear from you. So let's have a look then. I'll see if we can get it rearranged so that we can look at everything on the screen. We're going to go through a couple of different examples here. And the first one that we're looking at involves office deadlines. So I'm going to read it and then we could talk about how we could respond here. Emma has repeatedly missed deadlines for submitting reports, which delays the entire team's work. Her manager, Jacob, needs to give her an ultimatum. So the issue here is these repeated missed deadlines. But what is the behavior that Jacob wants her to do? Do you know what I mean? Like, he wants her to stop missing the deadlines, of course, but what's the positive framing of that? It would be make sure that you're meeting deadlines moving forward, or maybe he wants her to let him know earlier if there's a problem, like if she foresees that there might be an issue. Communication is another factor that they might talk about. If she needs support, it would be important for her to flag it. That would be another thing that he could ask, I suppose. But let's have a look at the approach that he actually ends up taking. Emma If you miss another deadline, we'll need to start a formal performance review process. Please let me know if there's anything you need to meet the next one on time. What do you think about that? What would you score it out of 10 in terms of effectiveness? Would you say that that's an effective ultimatum? Well, it does say, if you miss another deadline, we'll need to start a formal performance review process. So the threat is there. He hasn't taken my option of tentatively framing that. He said, we'll need to. So that's going to probably cause problems when she does miss another deadline, and in all likelihood, he doesn't actually start a formal performance review process. But assuming he did do it, do you think that he acted ethically? Like, I love this second bit, like, please let me know if there's anything you need to meet the next one on time. He's not saying, do you need anything, or this is an issue that I've noticed, I just want to touch base and talk it through. What's your perspective on this? It's like, please let me know if you need anything, you know what I mean? I think to me that's probably something of a hollow gesture of being a supportive manager. If you've just been literally given a warning, like you might be put on a performance management process, and then your manager says, please let me know if there's anything you need, I think that's almost a little bit of a like, what's wrong with you type of I don't know. What do you think? Like, I wouldn't like to be asked that in that timing and in that phrasing, but maybe that's me being overly sensitive. For me, if I was the manager, though, I would probably tweak that to say something like, I'd like to organise a time next week to go through where things are up to, and maybe there are different kinds of support that we need to be considering that would help you meet these deadlines. I'm also happy to talk through those. Now's probably not the time to do that, but that could be something that you would like to give some thought to, and then perhaps we could discuss it next week. So that's the way I'd do it, is like, I want to be supportive, like I'm instead stating my intentions, and I'm setting up a process where Emma will have a chance to ask for what she needs. But it's not like the responsibility's on you. You need to let me know. Please let me know if there's anything you need. I'd put it more like, let's look at the structure, and I want to give you as much, as support as is needed here. So part of that will be, we need to organise a time to communicate about what's needed, as opposed to, I'm assuming nothing's needed unless you come to me and barge into my office and interrupt me, which is probably something that's really scary and intimidating. And I know that you're probably not going to do it, but I am a supportive manager because I have said, please let me know if there's anything that you need. I don't know, maybe I've become a little bit too cynical after doing so many workplace mediations over the years. What do you think? So let's look at the next example here. We're looking at, I beg your pardon, let's go back, because we didn't properly talk about how Jacob could give the ultimatum ultimately, so to speak. So I think it would be something like, Emma, I just want to touch base. Is this a bad time? Would you prefer to talk it through later? I'd give her a short fuse appointment, like, can I touch base after work today, or are you free at about 4 p.m. this afternoon or something? And I'd say, look, Emma, I'd like to talk to you about deadlines. And then the next step would be talking about the facts. I've just noticed that you missed this deadline, and there's been a couple of others last month as well. And then I'd talk about the consequence. The reason that this is a problem is because it causes issues with what? Is it cash flow, or being responsive to clients, or allocating work effectively within the team? Now you're dealing with a bottleneck. Like, what's the problem that it's caused? Let's talk about the facts. How many has she missed, so that she's clear on it? And why is it even important? Then I'd probably say, if you miss another deadline, we'll need to, like, similar to this, if you miss another deadline, we'll need to start a performance review process. Whoops, that highlighter's not super effective, is it? So that part's fine, I think. But then we would want to build in, or if you can make sure that you're meeting deadlines consistently moving forward, and I'm going to pay particular attention to the next 2 to 3 months, I'd be happy to review that application that you've put in to take on the lead role in this next project. If you can make sure that you're meeting deadlines more consistently, like that's the thing that we're wanting her to do, then this is the better consequence for you, as opposed to a performance management type of process. Now, I tend to find that it's better to do that more positive one second, because it has the most prevalence in the person's memory and attention. But, it's not as simple as you do A, then B, then C. It's probably interrupting or crying or yelling or who knows what's going on in a real setting. But that's the framework that we've got in mind, I suppose. Let me know if you've got any questions down below, and I'd be happy to answer some as well. So let's look at the next example. We're looking at a restaurant situation here, and the staff member's Carlos. Carlos often swaps shifts at the last minute, leaving others scrambling to cover for him. The supervisor, Mia, decides to set a boundary. Let's make it a bit bigger so you can read it easier. And here's what she says. Carlos, if you swap a shift again without giving at least 24 hours notice, I won't approve your swaps in the future. Let's keep the schedule fair for everyone. What do you make of that one? Let's keep the schedule fair. Sounds good, right? It's common sense, isn't it? The challenge is that there's no such thing as common sense, and there's probably no such thing as fair either. So when she's talking about fair, I actually think that's a good word that she could use. But of course, that's not going to add any clarity to Carlos's perspective around why it's a problem. So I'd like this, like if you swap a shift again without 24 hours notice, she's also giving quite specific guidance around when this is a problem and when it's not. I won't approve your swaps in the future. Lovely. That's the sort of first option and the first consequence that we've outlined there. But what's missing, of course, is the second one. Or if you can give me at least 24 hours notice, then I'll do my best to approve, as many changes as you need to make. I know you've got young kids, and so it's not as easy for you as other people on the team to just make a plan and stick with it 2 weeks ahead of time. So that would probably be the way that I would phrase that. And if this one has a little bit of empathy built into it, like I know this is your situation, or I know this is important to you, or I know this is something you've been working towards or something like that, it's going to make it all the more effective as well. So then the final situation, the final case study that we're looking at, it involves a client confidentiality breach. Here we're dealing with Ravi. Ravi has twice shared confidential client information with the wrong internal teams, despite prior warnings. His department head, Eleanor, gives a final warning. So poor Ravi is sending, I suppose, to, there might be 2 Simons in the email book, for example, and he's sending it to the wrong person, or there's 2 teams that are marked similarly if it's a group email address and he's sending it to the wrong one. So how serious is a problem is this from your perspective? For me, a lot of the organizations that I've worked in have been not-for-profits, like government-funded services, and they haven't been particularly professional places in a lot of situations. Like they look corporate, but the people and there's policies and all that kind of stuff, like they do all of the corporate baggage, but they don't seem to have the corporate efficiency. Like it seems to be this, where do I save my files? Oh, you'll figure out a file system that works for you. It's like, but can we not get some type of an intranet set up so that we can share files with others internally? Email is the most secure way to share files, etc. So I have to admit that reading this, I suspect that probably there's other factors going on aside from Ravi. It's not just that he's either incompetent, like he's making a mistake, or that he's got bad intentions, that he's not trying, or he's malicious or something like that. And I actually think that might be something helpful for Eleanor to include here. Like rather than coming in sort of presenting an assumption that you think that it's his fault, I wonder what the effect would have been if instead you said something like, look, I don't know what's going on here. I just want to flag this issue with you. This is the second time I'm aware that it's happened. What happened? Like, can you fill me in a little bit here? What needs to change moving forward for this not to happen? As opposed to, you're naughty, you need to fix it. Well, then, of course, the response is, well, F you kind of thing, right? I think a lot of the time when managers treat their staff like a parent who treats children, they often get a childish kind of response. And for kids, even if they say yes to your face, they'll often find some way to get revenge on you, won't they? Something that they can do to get revenge, or some way to even the scales, so to speak, down the track. So let's have a look at what Eleanor said. Ravi, this is a serious matter. If it happens again, we'll need to escalate this to HR, which could impact your position here. Please ensure you double check before sharing sensitive data. So that's a nice direct way of, this is what she's asking him to do. But how frequently would that prevent the problem from coming up, do you think? Like, if Ravi checks very carefully and he's really doing his best to make sure that he's, looking through emails before he press sends, there still might be a mistake that comes up. So, how is he meant to demonstrate whether or not he is double checking before he sends sensitive information? It's a real challenge when we're looking at human factors, like there's human error involved. It's probably not going to be 100%. So, if I'm Ravi, probably that's the first thing I'm going to ask Eleanor is, I'm not sure, is the expectation that this will never happen? She'll probably say no one else seems to have a problem with it. Ravi, say, what's your problem? So I don't know if this is necessarily going to work or not, but what are we talking about here? There's so many of these principles and truisms that people spout off on, like, anything. Like, I'm at the moment doing a counseling course and it's on diversity, and it's all like, diversity is wonderful. Organizations should support the culture of its staff. And I'm like, sure, but how much? Like, how much money should they spend? How much cultural expression should people be allowed? Who's responsible for listening to their cultural expression if they have a right to say it? Who's responsible providing this if they have a right to get it? Like, a lot of these things are much more complex in reality, I think, than people think about. And anyway, for me, I think this, how perfect do we expect people to be? Because we know that, like, executive function, the prefrontal lobe, it doesn't work as effectively. The more stressed that we get, the more escalated that we become, or the more tired that we get. All the studies about tired driving is almost as dangerous as drink driving. And yet Ravi is still probably expected to do everything perfectly, even though who knows what, he might have a young baby at home and he's not getting much sleep, or he's going through a divorce, or he's got mental health issues or chronic pain, or we just have absolutely no idea what's going on for him. So for me, this expectation of 100%, anyway, I should probably get off my high horse about that one. I suspect if I was Ravi, I might end up getting in a pretty strong argument with my manager here, and it wouldn't necessarily go in a direction that's going to be good for me long term, but there we are. So Ravi, this is a serious matter. If it happens again, we'll need to escalate this to HR. I really like that, and this could impact your position here. Just a really nice way of phrasing that in my mind. Of course, the thing that's missing is the or. So we could say, if you can minimize these kinds of mistakes moving forward, or if you can more consistently double check your data, what I expect to see is that a reduction in sending this kind of thing. So what I'm looking for is not to get any more of these notifications from the other department heads that our client's sensitive information has been shared. I don't know, this is a little bit of a tricky one, isn't it? Please ensure that you double check before sharing your sensitive data. This will mean that you can avoid all of those complications with HR. Maybe this is one of those situations where instead of there being a positive consequence that we offer him now, it's more about avoiding the future consequence of the HR kind of process. But depending on who Ravi is, there might be particular things that Eleanor could offer him as well. So you don't want to keep making the mistakes. That's going to go down the HR route. But if you can minimize them and do the right thing moving forward, what is it that he wants? I would be happy to endorse you for this opportunity within the company, or I would be happy to increase the delegation that you have to, make decisions around these particular cases, or give you a different kind of case or a different kind of project or something else to work on, right? But like for Ravi, it might be that he's at the moment, this might be a law office and he's trying to get the organization to support him to do some study. Well, Eleanor could tie those two things in as well, I suppose, to say, look, I know this isn't something else that you're working towards. And of course, making sure that you're maintaining client confidentiality is something that's absolutely vital for that as well. If you're able to not make these kind of errors moving forward, and let's say it's 3 months down the track and you haven't made any, at that stage, I would be happy to endorse the organization covering that amount of cost for the course that you're hoping to enroll in. But the other part that's missing here, and I suppose it's implied, but I hope that it's obvious, is that we would always then pass the ball back to the other person that we're talking to. It's like, this is the ultimatum: bad choice, bad consequence, or good choice, good consequence. But then the next thing is, what do you think? How does that sit with you? Have you got thoughts about that? Would you like to respond to that? How does that sit with you? Do you have any questions? Is there any additional clarification that's needed? Does that strike you as realistic? Are there potential issues that might come up doing what I've asked you to do? What kind of support do you need in a more genuine way? Like, let's put our heads together and do a little bit of brainstorming. But we would then open up the dialogue, I think, open up the dialogue and open up the discussion. Sometimes not. Like, if it's just a contractor that I'm hiring and it's like, if you don't come back and fix it by the end of the week, then I'm not going to pay that invoice that's sitting here. We're not going to say, what do you reckon? What do you think? But I might say something like, what's realistic looking at the other stuff that you've got scheduled coming up? Or when do you think you can get back here by? Or when can you let me know what's the earliest that you'll be able to do it? If I give you a call this afternoon, would you be able to give me a more accurate estimate in terms of timeframes by then? You know, I'm probably then wanting to shift the focus towards the future and the solutions. Whereas in other people and other contexts, it's more supportive. It's more like, this is the ultimatum. Like, do you need a bit of empathy or acknowledgement or something like that to sort it out? And then I might even go down a coaching kind of route, I suppose. So how have you found all of that, looking through those different case studies that we've gone through and kind of explaining some of the different ways that we could implement that ultimatum framework? And what do you think? Is it something that's useful for you? And it sounds like something that could actually be, you could put it into practice? Or does it sound like something that's a little bit too theoretical and you're not exactly sure? I'd love to know your take on it as well. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that it's been useful, and I really hope that I'll see you again in a future video. Bye for now.